Welcome back, everybody, to the Miami Marlins franchise here on MLB The Show 23. Today's episode should be a pretty fun one as we have made it to the 2025 MLB Draft. We've made it through the first half of the year and up to the All-Star break, and it is draft time. We've highlighted these prospects throughout the season, and now we'll have another opportunity to improve our farm system, which is already pretty deep, with plenty of good prospects throughout AA and AAA. Last episode, we had the draft preview. In case you missed that episode, that one is in the series playlist for you to check out. So this is now our third draft with this team. We're not exactly new to this rodeo. How have some of our top picks through the first 2 years ended up? It has certainly been a mixed bag. Our first pick in year one was Woody Landry. He was a hit. Not much else to say. We had a competitive balance round A pick in season one, and we selected catcher Joel Beltran, who so far has not been so much of a hit. He's not exactly a spring chicken anymore. He's already 23 years old. His contact has been down from last year. His average is quite a bit lower, and it's not like he's drawing a ton of walks or hitting for a ton of power. He was a minor league dud of the year candidate last season, and I think he's been even worse this year. When we drafted him last year, I really thought he'd be the catcher of the future, but with his struggles and Nick Fortes playing really well, I'm not so sure that's the case anymore. While Beltran has been a miss up to this point, I certainly cannot say the same about starting pitcher Robbie Jones. He whipped through AA last year. He's been just as good in AAA. Who knows? Maybe this time next year he'll be in the bigs. He's our #1 ranked prospect in the entire farm system, and for good reason. He is awesome. How about last year's draft? If you remember, the guy we were really targeting was Agustin De La Cruz, who ended up getting drafted by the Royals. He's had a very good season for them in the major leagues, skipping through the minors altogether, where he has put together an AL Rookie of the Year type of season. With him off the board, we ended up selecting shortstop Ronald Andino in the first round, and he has been a flop up to this point. And I don't want to overreact. He's only been here 3 months. He's only 18 years old. But the numbers are not good at all. He has a negative WAR. His contact is abysmal. He doesn't draw a ton of walks. His power is fine, but what's good to that when your on-base percentage is lower than .250? In the second round, we drafted starting pitcher Hitoki Nomo. He's been very good so far in AA, albeit in a small sample size. So just as I don't want to overreact with Ronald Andino, I don't really want to overreact with Nomo, but I do really like him, and he is our second-ranked prospect of the organization. Along with Jones and Nomo, we do have 2 other top 50 prospects currently with Khalil Watson and Gennaro Miller. I feel like Miller certainly should be higher on that list, and he won't be on the list much longer, considering he is already in the big leagues. So we've had some good picks and some bad picks early in drafts throughout this series. We've got the 15th pick this year. We have another competitive balance round selection at 35. We have the 53rd pick in the second round and all of our other picks after that. It's a really fun group. We've gone in depth about a lot of these prospects throughout the year, and now it's time to see where they will end up landing. The 2025 MLB Draft is here. Of course, we had our draft lottery last year, which was won by the New York Mets. They will get the #1 pick. We, of course, have the 15th selection in every round. So do the Mets go with the potential generational outfielder with Kurt Kellenberger, or do they go with a more experienced player like a Ryan Stevenson or a Kyle Saul? I'm interested to see what direction they ultimately go with. With the first pick in the 2025 MLB Draft, the New York Mets select Ryan Stevenson, a starting pitcher out of Arizona. I'm a little bit surprised they passed on Kellenberger, but Ryan Stevenson's a very good prospect in his own right. He is super polished. You can put him into the rotation tomorrow if you want, but the upside with him is also really good. With the second overall pick, the Kansas City Royals select starting pitcher Darnell Floyd. This is certainly a surprise, as Floyd was a very real target for our pick at number 15 overall, and he ends up going second. With the third pick in the draft now, we've got a major shock here. Gilberto Tovar goes to the Pirates. He was projected to go in the 3rd round. To be fair, I think he is certainly a lot better than that projection, and he was a guy we would have eyed up at pick 53 most likely. Instead, he goes number 3 overall to the Pirates. So we've got a trio of starting pitchers off the board. The A's get the first bat. It's Kyle Saul. I can't blame them here. They just want somebody to insert in their lineup. Bobby Lopez to the Rockies. So Kurt Kellenberger, the projected #1 pick, is now out of the top 6 as the Orioles get Pablo Garcia. The Nationals drafted a generational outfielder 2 seasons ago with Justin Kramer, and instead they go with Geraldo Estrada, another late-round target for us. Alejandro Torres is off the board. What is happening? Kurt Kellenberger finally selected by the Reds. I was really hoping he'd fall to 15, but doesn't happen. So the Reds get a great pick there as Rex Murray goes to the White Sox. Darren Anderson to the Arizona Diamondbacks. The Boston Red Sox go with Jason Cho. A lot of the pitchers are going off the board early, as you can see. Kenny Felch off the board to the Milwaukee Brewers, and the Minnesota goes with Manny Franco, another guy who is heavily in consideration for our selection. So pretty much all of the pitchers we were looking at in this range, Stevenson, Floyd, Franco, they are off the board. You do still have plenty of relievers, but we're not going to pick a reliever here. There are still some good pitchers, but they are not projected to go for a little bit while. Even if the talent level is fine with somebody like Tyrell Berry, Geronimo Freitas, Jose Benitez, it does feel a little bit early. And if the Marlins go with a pitcher here, I think their guy would be Eric Thomas. I think it's more likely they go for a position player, though. I think first baseman Isaac Stu from the Dominican Republic is certainly in play. The Marlins have prioritized guys who are very advanced offensively, even if the defensive stats don't look all that good, just as they did with Woody Landry 2 years ago, and obviously last year they wanted Augustin De La Cruz. Another guy who I think is in play here is outfielder Cristobal Estrella. He kind of fits exactly what the Marlins need now. They're looking for guys who hit for good contact and hit atop the order. I think Estrella would be a great fit. The Marlins could surprise and look for more power over contact with a guy like Richie Vasquez, but prioritizing power has not exactly worked out, as we've seen with prospects like Joel Beltran and Ronald Andino not turning into very good players, at least so far. So with the 15th pick in the 2025 MLB Draft, the Miami Marlins select Isaac Stu, a first baseman from the Dominican Republic. As you guys have seen throughout these drafts, I prioritize guys who can hit the ball. Isaac Stu can hit the ball, folks. He's a switch hitter. He has very good contact and very good power on both sides of the plate. He's equally good against righties and lefties. Now, he's not a great defender, but I will say he does provide defensive versatility. He can play both of the corner infield spots along with the corner outfield spots, but we really got him because he can absolutely hit tanks. Now, I recognize that we have Woody Landry at first base already, and now we are adding another one. But Woody Landry is a good arm, so that can put him in a few different positions. And Stu, while none of his defensive attributes look all that enticing, he is listed with secondary positions of third, left, and right. So I'm sure we'll be able to make it work with both Woody Landry and Isaac Stu. And I think this is somebody who can be a top-of-the-order bat who hits for good contact, good power, good plate skills. He checks off all the boxes offensively, and this is somebody who can be a mainstay within our lineup for years to come. He was my realistic target here in the first round, and I'm happy I was able to land him. Lamont McGill goes to the Angels with the 16th pick. Quinn Palma goes to the Giants. Keep in mind we have a competitive balance round A pick at 35. William Serna Ruiz to the Toronto Blue Jays, a guy we were high on at one point, now not so much. Mel Winston off the board to the Cardinals. Ryan Cain, we kind of eyed him up for our next pick. He goes to the Philadelphia Phillies. Danny Sanchez is off the board to the Yankees. So far, not a lot of our targets have been picked yet, and right as I say that, Geronimo Freitas is off the board of the Rangers. He was a guy I was looking at in the second or third round, but I was really hoping to land him, so I'm really upset that he has fallen off the board. And then back-to-back picks, George Watkins and then Cristobal Estrella, two guys who we really liked, Estrella in particular. Roberto Nunez is off the board. He's a good player. And then there's Richie Vasquez to the Braves. All of the guys I was kind of wanting are being picked. Eric Thomas finally off the board. Randy Edelman, the center fielder, is taken. Only the 2 World Series teams are left. There's Edgar Silva, another guy we kind of considered going to the Cleveland Guardians. And then the Dodgers wrap it up with Elvis Ortega. Some of my later round targets are already being selected here in the first round. This is not good. We're going to start to see some of the relievers off the board, such as guys like Carlton Hahn. He goes to the Tampa Bay Rays. And then some more relievers here. Leslie Nunez, one more team in front of us. It's the Minnesota Twins. They go with Ray Valenzuela. So that'll bring us to the 35th pick. And while we still have some good targets for this pick, I feel like the board did not play out all that well for our later picks in the second and third round. The premier talent on the board is its starting pitcher. The name who certainly pops out is Tyrell Berry. Jose Benitez is not too worse either. Both of those guys are really good. We also really like reliever Adolfo Jimenez. And in terms of position players, I think second baseman Peter Gillis would be the name to watch. With the 35th pick in the 2025 MLB Draft, the Miami Marlins select Tyrell Berry, a right-handed starting pitcher from California. This was the obvious pick here for the Marlins. This was a pretty easy decision for me. While I do like the other players that I mentioned, Tyrell Berry is very clearly the best player on the board. We got to watch him with the under-18 U.S. national team, and he was really impressive. I think his walks per nine is probably going to be his best per nine attribute, which is a big deal, as you guys know. I really like my walks per nine. This is somebody who has good command of the strike zone. He throws really hard, and he's got a developing breaking ball. If there's an area to work on, I think he allows too many base hits. But other than that, there aren't really many major question marks about Tyrell Berry. I think you're looking at somebody who's got a really high ceiling, and this selection reminds me a lot of us drafting Robbie Jones 2 years ago, a pick that so far has really paid dividends with Jones skyrocketing up our minor league system, and I think Tyrell Berry could be the next great Marlins pitching prospect. I really like that pick. I'm happy we were able to land him. Again, he was my realistic target with this pick. And now already the board is not playing out well. Peter Gillis was the next player on my board, and he is the very next pick to the Tigers. At least we don't have to sweat it out, hoping he falls to our second round pick. But I would have really liked him because I think he's by far the best position player left. There are still some good pitchers who we've got our eyes on, starters and relievers. I will say I think the position player board has really taken a hit, and there aren't a ton of great value options in the second round. Throughout my scouting experience in this game, I've noticed that it's a lot easier to draft mid-round pitchers, which is why I've often gone for position players in the first round, as we've done in all 3 seasons. So far, none of our major targets have been picked yet here in the second round. I did kind of like Drew Woodson. He goes to Detroit. I think he's got intriguing power upside. The Reds get Jose Benitez. He would have been my pick here now. He's by far the best player left on the board. The Reds are killing it today with first Kurt Kellenberger and now Benitez. So hats off to Cincinnati. They are doing a great job. Just a few picks away from our selection. Some more solid players going off the board, but none of these guys other than Benitez were really high targets of mine. Only 2 more picks to go. Jeffrey Holt goes to the Milwaukee Brewers, and that'll bring up Minnesota. They go with Art Kelly, another pretty good pitching prospect. I'm not sure if we would have looked at him here, but he was one of the better starting pitchers on the board. So that'll bring us to our second round pick, and in terms of pure talent, reliever Adolfo Jimenez looks like the best player on the board. You still have some good starting pitchers, though, and it's kind of against my philosophy to draft a reliever, so maybe it would make more sense for us to look at a starter. In terms of position players, as I mentioned just a moment ago, it is very depleted. I was really hoping we have a slight chance that Peter Gillis would fall here. Unfortunately, it does not happen. I'm not sure it's really worth taking a reach on one of these position players when there's guys I like down the board who are a little bit better. So do we go against our philosophy and pick a reliever, or do we go with a starting pitcher who might be a slightly worse prospect, or maybe look at a position player? With the 53rd pick in the 2025 MLB Draft, the Miami Marlins select Adolfo Jimenez, a right-handed relief pitcher from the Dominican Republic. This is the first time in this entire series we have drafted a reliever, and we're doing so with a premium pick here in the second round. If we're going to pick a reliever early, I want it to be on a guy like Adolfo Jimenez. This is a prospect who I really like. I think the upside is phenomenal. He is a mountain of a man, 6'5", 233 pounds. This is somebody who's got gas. The walks per nine is his worst per nine attribute, which does kind of suck. But he's not horrible in terms of throwing walks, and the other per nines look really good. This is somebody who I think has a really high ceiling, and if developed properly, could become one of the best relievers in baseball. I think the value is too much to pass up here in the second round, especially considering there aren't many great players left. One of the few position players I liked, Mark Clark, goes with the very next pick to the Angels. So again, the board is really not playing out well. Luke French was projected to go in the first round. I thought about him a little bit just because he was projected so high. He ends up going to the St. Louis Cardinals. Pedro Esperanza, solid pitching prospect, to the Rangers. Why do the Rangers got to draft all these good players? We're kind of getting a run on pitchers now, which is not good because I think that's where the value is into the third round. I was hoping somebody like Mark Clark would fall to our third round pick, and obviously that is not going to happen. So I think the value at this point is with the pitchers. Anthony Serrano was another name I was kind of watching. He ends up going to the Braves because obviously the Braves draft all of the really good players. I think the shortstop position is one of the deeper spots in this draft, and already we're seeing some of them like Clark and Serrano go off the board. That'll now bring us into some of the compensatory rounds for teams who lost big free agents. Obviously, this does not apply to us because we don't have any big free agents to lose to begin with. Again, we've got some more pitchers going off the board like Killian Doe and Sean Geronimo. Now we have another competitive balance round. This is round B, as the Guardians have a number of picks here. They lost a lot of guys last year after their World Series run, but their farm system has a good history of quickly replenishing. It still feels like we've got a big run on pitchers here. One of the highest ones left on our board, Thomas Fisher, has just been drafted by the Colorado Rockies. So I'm concerned a lot of these pitchers who we passed on in the second round because we knew they would fall here might not end up falling. Into the third round now, this is where it really gets a little bit challenging to find players. And this is no longer the premium pick range in the draft, but more so the dart-throwing stage of the draft. So we have to think accordingly here. Honus Holder's a guy with high upside, even though he's a little bit more raw and a little bit older. That's a strategy we could certainly look at. Try to ensure somebody with a higher potential, even if they're going to be a late bloomer. Or we might have to look at 18-year-old wild cards who are literally dart throws, especially if all of these pitchers are going to continue to go off the board, because that certainly seems to be how it's trending. I'm not sure we're going to have many good pitching options on the board for us here in the third round, as we're now just a few picks away. The Diamondbacks are up now here with the 10th pick in the round. They go with third baseman David Lance. Third base was really weak in this draft. I'm not sure if there was anybody who had a top 80 grade at the position, but some have been reached on. A couple poor picks now as the Milwaukee Brewers will go with Scotty Jackson. He's a very pro-ready shortstop who should be able to contribute right away. And then catcher Alex Dominguez is off the board to the Twins. So that'll bring us up here in the middle of the third round. Let's take a look at how the board has played out for us. A lot of the pitchers who we were kind of eyeing up here have been taken off the board. There are still a couple of good ones like Morgan Jordan, Alfonso Bravo, guys who are projected to go a little bit later than this, but obviously their talent is really, really good. And if we really want them, we might have to pick them now. There are still some guys below them, but overall the talent level is not great. And then again, in terms of position players, it's not super deep. It's really hard for finding position players deep down the board. So I think a good strategy here, as I kind of alluded to earlier, might be looking at guys who are basically guaranteed high potentials, even if they're a little bit older and a little bit more raw, if we don't go the pitcher route. I think Jim Hess at second base is a good example of this. Even though he's a late bloomer, the upside looks really good, along with shortstop Felipe Bautista and outfielder Yoenis Jimenez. So with the 90th pick in the 2025 MLB draft, the Miami Marlins select Yoenis Jimenez, a center fielder from the Netherlands and the University of Tennessee. So why are we looking at Yoenis Jimenez, a player we have barely scouted, over one of the pitchers? Well, the answer is simple. His potential. He's going to have between 80 and 99 potential, assuming our scouts are correct here. So there's basically a 50% chance that he's going to have a potential. And I think his rating is not bad enough to where he's like 5 years away. I think there's really something to work with here with Jimenez. And although he is already 22 years old, I think he could be a good pro within a few years if we get lucky with his rating being a little bit higher than projected. I didn't think he was going to make it to the fourth round, and I feel like a lot of these starting pitchers are kind of interchangeable in terms of talent. So I wanted to make sure I would get Jimenez here, and we'll see if any of them end up going before our fourth round selection. So hopefully we can get lucky with the pitcher board after selecting Jimenez. We can always go back to the route of drafting an older or younger player looking for upside The New York Yankees end up selecting starting pitcher Morgan Jordan. He was the highest pitcher left on our board. And then the second highest one, Alfonso Bravo, is the very next pick to the Texas Rangers. The Rangers in specific have been stealing a lot of our late round targets before we've been able to get our hands on them. So if this draft has taught me anything, it's get your guys early. Not that I regret any of my picks, but more so, some of the guys I liked in like the third and fourth round ended up going in the first round. So that sort of tells me that you might have to reach a little bit if there's a guy you really like. Some other names to watch out here for late. I like catcher Russell Weston. He ended up going to the San Diego Padres. He was a guy I kind of had my eye on. I think he can be a pretty good player. Alan Azzopardi, a first baseman of the Guardians. He's super polished, very similar to our selection of Ryan Poles last year in the sense of he may not have the highest ceiling, but he can hit the ball. Certainly not a bad route for them to go, especially as a championship contender looking for more names off the bench. So now we are here into the fourth round. It becomes even harder to find good players, and we have drafted well in this series in the fourth round. Season 1 in specific, we drafted starting pitching prospect Cameron Norman, who ended up being a very good value selection for round 4. And then last year we drafted outfielder Charles Harris. Both Norman and Harris have B potential. So we ended up doing a really good job in the fourth round, looking to keep it going this year. But some of the names we liked are going off the board. Jim Hess goes to the Pirates. Felipe Batista goes to the Tigers. Those were two of the other older prospects with high ceilings. So those guys are now off the board for us. Fernando Cabrera, a third baseman, was another guy I wanted to keep my eye on. He's an 18-year-old who we haven't really scouted yet, but I thought he could be an interesting dart throw as somebody who's got a lot of potential. So some of the position players I was eyeing up are gone. All of the pitchers I was really eyeing up are gone. So again, the board has not played out very well for us. Only one more pick to go. Minnesota goes with Dustin Iden. And so that'll bring us here to the 120th pick of the draft. What do the Marlins do here? So something interesting I noticed here with the starting pitchers is that there are only 2 left on the entire board. So that's certainly something to monitor. If you want to get one of these pitchers, you might have to do it now. Do the Marlins go that route, or do they go with a position player? With the 120th pick, the Miami Marlins select Steven Fisher, a first baseman out of the Dominican Republic. This is the second Dominican-born first baseman we've drafted today with Isaac Stu in the first round. Steven Fisher is also a switch hitter, interestingly enough, and the offense is certainly why we drafted him, along with the upside. He's got high potential, and he's pretty young. He's only 19 years old, which is impressive for somebody who's probably going to have A or B potential. Now he is raw. He's got a long ways to go, but we've got plenty of good first basemen in the system already, so we'll be able to take our time with him and develop him. He's got a ways to go, but I think the ceiling with him could be really good in a few years. So we're taking a dart throw on upside with Steven Fisher here in the fourth round, hoping we can get lucky with one of these late round picks as we take a look at some of the other selections here in the fourth round. Freddie Gonzalez was an intriguing catcher. I always like to add catching depth. He was a guy I kind of had my eye on. Andres Cuevas, a reliever. He's not a bad player. He goes to the Cardinals, another guy who I had briefly considered a little bit here in the fourth round. Pretty much everybody who was on my pre-draft radar going into the draft has already been taken at this point. So the board can't really play out poorly for us because we don't really have much of a board left. The guys we thought would go in this range went in the first and second round. And then guys who we thought would go later who we liked have gone in this range. So we have really gotten unlucky throughout the draft. But when life gives you lemons, you got to make lemonade. I think we've done a good job of rebounding. We've drafted a lot of high upside players and a lot of guys who I think will be able to contribute. Perry Shibuya, a starting pitcher off the board of the Mariners. So that means there's only one starting pitcher left in the entire draft with Ian Rigdon. You'd think he would get picked at some point pretty soon. So that'll be something to potentially monitor as we wrap up round 4 into round 5. What is the plan here for the Marlins? Do they double down on upside? Do they double down on guys who they think can contribute? Or maybe they do 1-1. Maybe they take a swing for the fences, and maybe they look at a player who they think has a good chance of contributing at the big leagues, even if he will never be that good of a player. I mean, really, at this point in the draft, if you can get someone who eventually does contribute in the major leagues, it is a very, very good pick. But on the flip side, it's hard to find major league contributors here, so maybe taking a swing on somebody who you think can be really good is not necessarily the worst idea. only a few more picks away. Again, we didn't really scout most of these players because these guys were not on our radar whatsoever. The one starting pitcher left on the board, Ian Rigdon, has not been selected yet, interestingly enough, and it seems like he will potentially be on the board for the Marlins in the 5th round. So we'll see if that's the route they ultimately go with, assuming he is not selected here within the next 2 picks. The Brewers go with DJ Smith. He was actually a guy we kind of liked. He's got interesting potential. And then Solomon Grimes, an outfielder, goes to the Twins. So that'll bring us here to our second to last pick of the day, and we've got an interesting decision here to make with Ian Rigdon as the top projected player on the board. He's a pitcher who has a very high floor, but probably never will become a true starter. Do you look at him, or do you look at a high upside position player in this range? The thing with Rigdon is you're not going to get another player like him later because, well, he's the only starting pitcher left. So do the Marlins look at him, or do they take a swing on potential with one of these position players? There are some intriguing options, and last year in the 5th round, we did draft a beat potential 18-year-old with J.J. Cohen. I think somebody like that would certainly be a great pick here again in round 5. The player who would be our J.J. Cohen pick here would probably be third baseman Johnny Henderson. I know some of those offensive ratings look really, really bad, but he's got upside. Do we look at a guy like Henderson, or do we look at a guy like Rigdon? With the 150th pick in the 2025 MLB Draft, the Miami Marlins will select third baseman Johnny Henderson out of Indiana. He's an 18-year-old high school prospect. He's a smaller player, 5'11", 177. I think he's got a really high upside, but I think the floor of him is like out of professional baseball in 2 years. There's a chance his offense is really, really bad, but we have seen him produce at the high school level. He played in the Perfect Game All-Star Showcase, and he had a pretty good performance in that game against other really good players, including starting pitcher Tyrell Berry, who we drafted in the 2nd round. So I think Johnny Henderson could end up being a really good player. This is a total swing for the fences. There's a good chance he doesn't amount to anything, but hopefully, like J.J. Cohen in the 5th round last year, he's got some long-term developmental upside, even if he's going to be a long ways away from the major leagues. So again, as we kind of had talked about in the 4th round, we really don't have much of the board here going into our final pick of the day. Johnny Henderson, for example, was not really on my radar going into the day. Neither was Ian Rigdon, the starting pitcher, who still hasn't been picked yet, along with really any of the other position players left. And at this point, there really aren't many high upside players left, which is why I opted to go with Johnny Henderson. He has a higher ceiling than anybody left on the board at this point, as most of these other players don't even have the long-term upside that Henderson really has. So most of these prospects really don't entice me anymore because the ceiling is low. They're not all that good right now. So none of these guys were really on my radar whatsoever here late in the 5th round. We'll see if Ian Rigdon does end up getting selected. I'm surprised he's still on the board because the previous starting pitcher got drafted in the 4th round. So the fact that Rigdon is still here basically at the end of round 5 is really surprising, and it'll be interesting to see how much longer he ends up slipping and if there's really a reason that he has been slipping. Now to round 6, the final round of the day. We'll see what the Marlins opt to do here again with the 15th pick of the round. Historically, we've actually drafted pretty well in round 6. Back in season 1, we drafted starting pitcher Fernando Cabrera, and last year we drafted starting pitcher Johnny Lundy. While neither of those guys are like elite prospects or anything, both of those picks were actually really good values for round 6, particularly Johnny Lundy, because he's close to being a 75 overall already and could be a big league contributor. And I think Fernando Cabrera could be a big league contributor as well. So the fact that we've been able to find potential major league guys in round 6 is really impressive. And we'll see if we can keep the streak going here with a few more picks to go. Ian Rigdon, the starting pitcher, is still on the board. Interestingly enough, we'll see if he ends up falling a little bit farther, and if he does, do the Marlins ultimately go that route? There is clearly a reason why he has slipped this far, so maybe the Marlins look to pass on him because of the red flags and instead go for one of the other position players. But again, as I kind of mentioned earlier, there really aren't many high upside guys left. Charlie Ragsdale goes to the Twins, and with that, we have made it to our selection here in round 6, the final selection for the Marlins of the day. So the storyline over the past round or so has been the fall of starting pitcher Ian Rigdon. He is still here in round 6. He doesn't really have high upside whatsoever, but he has a higher floor than just about anybody here. There are some guys with pretty high ceilings left on the board, but nobody like Johnny Henderson. So what did the Marlins do here in round 6? With the 180th pick in the 2025 MLB draft, the Miami Marlins select Ian Rigdon, a 21-year-old starting pitching prospect from Cuba and the University of Miami. So the Marlins go with Rigdon, who's been pitching basically in our backyard with the Miami Hurricanes. So we've been able to watch him up close and personal. And I think here in round 6, this is not a bad pick. The potential with him is very low. His median potential rating is basically a 70 to a 71. I know that does not look tempting at all, but the fact of the matter is I don't see any big league contributors on the board here. I think Ian Rigdon could be a guy who sneaks into the back end of the bullpen one day and potentially gets big league reps that way. Nobody else here I see other contributing in the majors, bearing something crazy. So that's why we decided to go with Rigdon here, the final starting pitcher left on the board. He's probably never going to be a true starter in the majors, but I think he's got a high enough floor to where he'll either eventually make it into the big leagues as a bullpen guy, or he can just provide really good organizational depth in AA or AAA. And even that is not that bad of a pick in this range, again, considering most of these other players are not good. Miguel Calderon, for example, is one of the higher upside players left. He would have been the alternative, and he doesn't really move me at this stage in the draft over a guy like Ian Rigdon. Only a few more picks to go before we wrap things up here. Mike Jamison, he was a somewhat intriguing outfielder, goes to the Houston Astros. Brian Sonberg is off the board to the San Diego Padres. The Rays go with Chris Maraville. The Atlanta Braves are probably going to draft a 4-time All-Star here. They go with catcher Pablo Reyna. That'll bring up the Seattle Mariners now, and they will select Dominique Nivar, another catcher, another guy who is one of the better players left on the board. Mike Rivas is then taken. That'll bring us to the Cleveland Guardians. They go with Doyle Plank. That name goes hard. One more pick to go. Mr. Irrelevant with the Los Angeles Dodgers, and they go with Pedro Barrero. So that'll wrap up round 6, and that'll wrap up the 2025 MLB draft. And I think all things considered, we did a pretty good job. We got our top targets in the first 2 rounds with Isaac Stu and Tyrell Berry. The rest of the board did not play out how we anticipated, but I think we did a good job rebounding. We got the reliever we like, Adolfo Jimenez. I did not think he would make it into the 50s, and I think we did a good job of drafting high upside players like Yoenis Jimenez and Johnny Henderson, along with potential big league contributors like Ian Rigdon. So that'll wrap up the episode. Next time around, we're going to go through the All-Star break and a large chunk of July leading up to the trade deadline. Let me know what you thought of our draft down below. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. Peace out.